towards the major plan that we have for educating India for the proper improvement and upliftment of the country, and which is to a great extent possible through proper education only. Now, we are very glad that we have Professor Nasreen Ma'am with us, who is the chairperson of the Department of Education, Aligarh Muslim University. I extend my warm welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you very, very much for giving us time. Like today, I know, ma'am, you had a very busy schedule. In spite of that, you have been able to take out some time for us. Thank you very much. And on this National Education Day, like, I don't know, like at least we and the organizing members, we couldn't have think of anyone better than the eminent speaker that has given us the consent and has joined us today, Professor Shakila Samsu, ma'am. Like, a very welcome to you, ma'am, and thank you very, very much for giving us the time. And I'm sure, like at your deliberation, there'll be a lot to learn for all of us. And my extreme thanks to all the organizing members of Department of Education, uh, Taslim Saab, Rashid Ahmed Saab, Samad Saab, Umair Saab, uh, Ayaz Saab. I hope I'm not missing out anyone. Fahim Saab. So to all my esteemed colleagues, thank you that you have organized such a beautiful program for the National Education Day today. And best wishes to all my participants today. Hope there'll be a lot to learn from after hearing from our honorable chief guest, our respected speaker of the day, Professor Shakila Samsu ma'am. So once again, I would like to offer my gratitude and thanks to all who have joined today, and I wish that this program's uh, comes out to be successful and fruitful and serves the purpose for which it has been organized. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, sir, for this beautiful welcome address. Now it is the time to listen to the chief guest of this program, Professor Nasreen, Chairperson, Department of Education. But before I invite her, I wish to read a brief profile of her. Professor Nasreen is presently the Chairperson, Department of Education, Aligarh Muslim University. She did her MPhil and PhD from Aligarh Muslim University. She has a rich experience of more than 25 years in teaching and research. She has completed a major research project of UGC. She is also the coordinator of MOOC program at SWAM. She has published more than 40 research articles in reputed national and international journals. She is the author of 4 books and edited 1 volume. She has published 3 important psychological scales as well. She has presented more than 45 papers in national and international journals. With these words, now I invite her to share her expert opinion on this occasion. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Your voice is coming.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Doctor. It's my pleasure. Okay. On the Dr. Kila 2020, Honorable for Sahab, AMU Murshidabad Center, my dear colleagues and dear students. Assalamu alaikum. Convey my hearty thanks to Director AMU Murshidabad and members of Organizing Committee of Department of Education to give me this opportunity of interaction with all. And congratulations to all of you to organize such a wonderful webinar on a relevant topic. Today we are celebrating birth anniversary, 132 birth anniversary of Abul Kalam Ghulam Muhyiddin Ahmad bin Khairuddin Al Husseini Azad. He was an Indian scholar, Islamic theologian, independence activist, and a senior leader of Indian National Congress during the Indian independence movement. He was the first Minister of Education in independent India and he is commonly remembered as Maulana Azad. Maulana means our master and he adopted Azad free as his pen name. His contribution to establishing the Education Foundation in India is recognized by celebrating his birthday as National Education Day across India. As India's first Minister of Education, he emphasized on educating the rural poor girls and boys. And as chairman of the Central Advisory Board of Education, he gave thrust to adult literacy, universal primary education, free and compulsory education for all children up to the age of 14. Girls' education and diversification of secondary education and vocational training. He oversaw the setting up of Central Institute of Education, Delhi, which later became the Department of Education of the University of Delhi as a research center for solving new educational problems of the country. Under his dynamic leadership, the Ministry of Education established the first Indian Institute of Technology in 1951 and the University Grants Commission in 1953. He also laid emphasis on the development of the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and the Faculty of Technology of the Delhi University. He foresaw a great future in the IITs for India. He said, I have no doubt that the establishment of this institute will form a landmark in the progress of higher technological and research in the country. By influencing the contribution of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, the Ministry of Minority Affairs of the central government of India set up the Maulana Azad Education Foundation in 1989 on the occasion of his birth centenary to promote education amongst educationally backward section of the society. The ministry also provides the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad National Fellowship, an integrated 5-year fellowship in the form of financial assistance to the students from minority communities to pursue higher studies such as MPhil and PhD. In 1992, Government of India honored him as a Bharat Ratna, most civilian, most prestigious civilian award. He also several institutions have been given name as Maulana Azad in his honor. Some of there are Maulana Azad Medical College in New Delhi, Maulana Azad National Institute of Technology in Bhopal, Maulana Azad National Urdu University in Hyderabad, Maulana Azad Center for Elementary and Social Education, Delhi University, the Maulana Azad College, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute of Studies, and Maulana Abul Kalam Azad University of Technology in Kolkata. Babi Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Gate number 7, Jamia Millia Islamia, the Maulana Azad Library in Aligarh Muslim University. Maulana Azad Stadium in Jammu and his home housed the Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute of Asian Studies earlier and is now the Maulana Azad Museum. He served as Education Minister from 1947 till 1998. He is celebrated as one of the founders and greatest patrons of the Jamia Millia Islamia. Azad tomb is located next to the Jamia Millia Islamia, New Delhi. This is about the honor that a nation giving to him. Now we come to the scenario of the education system of this country. Now the question arises, how far we able to fulfill the dream of our great leader, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad? Are we able to achieve those objectives that were framed after independence, keeping in mind the need of poor Indians? The answer is partially yes. Several committees and commissions were set up to improve the scenario of education system in India after independence. Remarkable efforts were made, and with the result of that, improvement in the field of education related to school education, teacher education, higher and technical education have been observed. But still, we need continuous efforts. Being educated citizen of Indian society, we have to do. Following are the educational issues that really focused our brain, our attention towards the various problems. And these problems are quantity versus quality. We are increasing the number of schools, we are increasing the number of teacher training institutes, but quality is deteriorating. Equity versus excellence, autonomy versus accountability, urban versus rural enrollment ratio, and public versus private institutions. In this education policy 2020 has opened the door of quality education, qualitative education along with multidisciplinary approach. The National Education Policy 2020 urges that teachers truly shape the future of our children, and therefore the future of our nation, hereby imply that teachers play the most important role in nation building by creating high quality of human resource in their classrooms. Although the idea that an empowered teacher has the potential to move mountains, the ground realities are quite different. A broken teacher education sector is putting over 370 million children at risk, as said by the Justice J.S. Verma Committee report in 2012. Rather than blaming teachers for poor learning outcomes in Indian classrooms, the NEP 2020 uphold these dismal conditions of teacher education. Recruitment, deployment, and service conditions, these have been explained in NEP 2020. The above factors account for the lack of teacher quality and motivation. As far as teacher education is concerned, based on the recommendations of NEP 2020 on teacher education and training, a national curriculum framework for teacher education NCFTE 2021 will be drafted to guide all teacher education, pre-service and in-service of teachers working in academic, vocational and special education streams. The 4-year integrated B.Ed, the minimal degree qualification for school teachers, is conceived as a multidisciplinary and integrated dual major bachelor's degree in education as well as a specialized subject. All multidisciplinary universities have been directed to set up an education department and run B.Ed program in collaboration with their other departments such as psychology, philosophy, sociology, and neuroscience. The B.Ed degree will teach a range of knowledge, content, and pedagogy and will include strong practicum training. And the curriculum will also include effective techniques in pedagogy on foundational literacy and numeracy. Multi-level teaching and evaluation, teaching children with disabilities with special interests or talents, use of education technology, and learner-centered and collaborative learning are the main recommendations of National Education Policy 2020. Shorter post B.Ed certificate course will also be made available for career growth of teachers who wish to move into more specialized areas of teaching or into leadership and management position in the schooling system, or to move from stage to another between foundational, preparatory, middle, and secondary stages. The policy proposes the minimum teacher education degree requirement to from the degree 4-year B.Ed undergraduate program by 2030. So these all many more recommendations are also there, but the major I have presented before you. Now the question is that how far we will be able to achieve the objectives of our National Education Policy 2020. What we have done well, But now the time is to do something with commitment, because whenever the commitment is lacking, all the policies, all the recommendations misses. And what happened, the things remains in the books, and we could not find any kind of benefit. So this today is the day, is the National Education Day. It is our duty, that it recalls our duty and responsibilities, that we must pledge that whatever we will do with the hard work, commitment, and sincerely, as to develop or as to fulfill the dreams of our great leader Maulana Abul Kalam Azad. Then we can say that this is the successful celebration that we are doing today. So, with these words, I would like to say once again, congratulations to you all to celebrating this day, and may God give you strength to do better in coming days, and you will prove yourself as an excellent teacher, as an excellent department of Aligarh Muslim University. And I extend my warm regards to Professor Shakila Shamsu Sahiba. I have done one project on SWAM MOOCs in collaboration with REI Mysore. Our department has done, and I was the course coordinator. She guided us in a very impressive way, and we could be able to achieve the objectives. So really, you are guide, mentor, teacher for us. But there is a competitive examination of BLIV in Aligarh Muslim University, and I am superintendent of this examination. So Amir Zafar told me only share few minutes with us, so I could not say no, and anyhow I could reach to that point. So I will not be able, madam, to keep stay here for longer time. Later on, whenever I will be free, I will talk to you, and I would like to invite you in my department also. My accept my warm regards. Congratulations to all of you. Thank you very much giving me this opportunity. Allah Hafiz. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for enlightening us with your wonderful address. You have introduced about great personality Maulana Azad, his contribution and honor given to him by naming educational institutions after him. You have introduced also the key features of NPE 2020. Thank you very much, ma'am. Moving ahead, it is time to invite the keynote speaker of this program, Professor Shakila Shamsu ma'am. But before I invite her, I wish to share a brief profile of her. Dr. Shakila Shamsu, formerly OSD, New Education Policy, National Education Policy in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, and also the Nodal Officer of the flagship scheme of the National Mission on Teachers and Training, NMTT. She has been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy. Prior to this, she held senior positions OSD 12th Plan and Joint Advisor to Planning Commission. Her core areas cover educational planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT, enabled learning, open and distance learning, and inclusive education. Her academic career spans over 39 years. 9 years as lecturer in the University of Mumbai, 16 years in IGNOU, and over 14 years in the Government of India. She holds a PhD in education, gold medalist from the University of Mumbai for her master's degree, PG diploma in distance education, and a degree in law. She has, to her credit, a number of articles in international journals and book contributions. She has been a member of several committees for the preparation of plan documents and reports on various aspects of education. She has delivered keynote address at several national and international conferences. With these words, now I like to invite Shakila ma'am to share her views.
Thank you for the kind words, and good Assalamu alaikum to all of you, and greetings to Dr. Zafar and Dr. Nazreen and other members of AMU Murshidabad. It is one of the centers that I have a fond nostalgia, because at the time it was the two centers, or rather the three centers of Kishanganj, Murshidabad, and Malappuram were set up. I was a part of the ministry in terms of facilitating the fund releases, and therefore I am feel a sort of a sense of gratification to see that the center has grown to the level it has. I'm extremely thankful to the center for having invited me, and also on this particular day, which holds a special place for us while we rededicate ourselves to the goals and vision of a great visionary who himself never formally had any school education, but who was considered a prodigy and a scholar, and who contributed to the reformation of the education system in our country as the first education minister, and who is fondly remembered for the clear commitment that he felt, and has been said by earlier speakers, for understanding that the and the only transformative tool that can bring about change is education. And it is only befitting that on the National Education Day of 11th November 2020, we look at the National Education Policy, which is also outlining a set of reforms which will transform the educational landscape of this country. And I remember particularly a quote which I think is very appropriate of Maulana ji. Every individual has right to an education. Every individual has right to an education that will enable him to develop his faculties and live full human life. Now, this quote, I'll repeat it, every individual has right to an education that will enable him to develop his faculties and live a full human life. The NEP 2020, more or less, actually tries to resonate with this particular quote of Maulana ji. And how does it seek to do that? Because it tries to create an enabling ecosystem where every child and every creation of God has adequate opportunities given for fulfilling his or her own aspirations as per the talents that that child possesses. And that is the crux of this policy, which distinguishes itself from earlier education policies. Within the short time of about half an hour to about 35 to 40 minutes that I may have, I may not be able to do justice to the entire NEP 2020, but I would like this audience here to understand the spirit behind this particular policy and to understand some of the crucial takeaways. And I'm happy that Dr. Nazreen has talked about the reforms that we are envisaging in teacher education, which may be of great interest, which may have been of great interest to the participants here today. Now, we all say this is the first education policy of the 21st century, while it is the third in the journey of education policies in this country. And while we say it is the first education policy of the 21st century, we must also remember that 20 years of the century have already been completed and gone by. And if this policy came after about 34 years, then this particular policy of 2020 is likely to be there almost to the middle of this particular century. If so, then we have to have a policy which is responding to the changes and the challenges of the 21st century. And it is in that spirit that the NEP 2020 comprehensively looks at the entire educational spectrum, starting from the early childhood care and education, and going on to cover school education in its entirety, higher education, embedding within itself technical education and professional education, as well as looking at teacher education, vocational education, adult education, and cross-cutting themes of technology in education, and a whole gamut of changes that need to come about in our institutional structures, whether they are schools or whether they are regulatory bodies or whether they are higher education institutions. And obviously, as a policy which is looking at education, its core stakeholder, that is the student, it is seeking to empower that student or equip that student with the right kind of knowledge, attitudes, and capabilities and skills so that they can meet with the changing needs of the economy and the society. Now, many have asked, why did you have to have a new policy at all? Policies are a response to the changes that happens. And you can see that today we are living in a time where technology has sort of more or less invaded our lives. We are living at a time when research and innovation is the norm of the day. We are living at the time when change is so dynamic, and therefore societal changes take place, economic changes take place, national ambitions grow, and so also the nation as a concept is to be seen as a part of a global committee of nations and not one which lives independent of other nations. In the sense, we are living in a society which we call is a part of sustainable development in a committee of nations. If all these have to be recognized, then the current policies are not looking at empowering the youth with kind of knowledge, skills, and abilities or capabilities that are needed in this changing economy or the changing society. And that is why there is a new policy. We are all beneficiaries of earlier policies, and many of you, as faculty, all belong to an age group where we benefited from educational policies of the past. It is not that policies or existing structures are to be changed for the purpose of changing it alone, but they have to be changed so that they meet other requirements and meet the dynamic requirements of a new knowledge economy. Having said that, I often tell the philosophical foundations that form the basis of the recommendations of NEP 2020. And I'm sure many of you coming from the field of education would have read the Jacques Delors Commission report or the UNESCO report of learning in the 21st century, where we recognize that learning is not a unidimensional activity, but learning is a multidimensional activity. And it is learning to know the knowledge, learning to do the experiential, the practical, the skill-based, learning to live together and to live with others, the aspect of coexistence and carrying forward as a team together, the collaborative part of it, and learning to be, which is the self-actualization and the self-realization of one's talents and potentials. And it is in keeping with this multidimensional aspect of learning and the fact that we are a signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations and SDG Goal 4 in particular, to provide inclusive and quality equitable education for all with lifelong learning opportunities, that the NEP 2020 outlined 5 goals of access, equity, excellence, quality, accountability, and affordability. Now, these 5 pillars that we have said have been further broken up into 22 cardinal principles, which we have outlined in chapter 1 of the NEP 2020. And the very first cardinal principle we say is resonating with what I just read as a quotation from Maulana ji, that is to recognize, identify, and nurture the unique potential of every child and promote their holistic development. That is what education should be all about. That you do not condemn a child because the child is not good at mathematics or not good at science or not good at economics, but a child has multi-dimensional talents and potentials. It may be in music, it may be in sports, it may be in performing arts, it may be in learning of languages, it could be in some creative form, but all these contribute to the holistic development of the child. And the current educational system has so much of emphasis only on an aspect of the academic part of it, that every other aspect of a child's development seems to be ignored in the very critical stages of a child's learning curve, which is between the ages of 3 to almost 24. By the time the child is out of an education system, the child has become so structured and the child has only narrow scope of learning that the child is unable to cope with many dynamic changes that are happening around him or her. We say this at a time when as a country we boast to have the youngest population in the world, and therefore saying that we have a demographic window of opportunity. But that demographic window of opportunity can become a demographic dividend and not a demographic disaster only if you have empowered youth who are having the right kind of skills, the right kind of attitudes and capabilities to meet with the job requirements, to contribute to the knowledge so in the society, either become knowledge creators with better research and productivity in that area, or entrepreneurs, and also be effective job seekers to get the right kind of employment. If you have an employment, if you have a scenario where 80% of engineering students apply for the job of a clerk in a government department, then something is fundamentally wrong with the kind of education we are providing. What is the relevance between the education and the employment that our youth are doing? These are the reasons why a new policy had to be brought about. And we are hoping that the main recommendations of focusing on early childhood care and education, where we have recognized that 85% of the cumulative brain development happens between the ages of 3 to 6, and therefore only having an Anganwadi system cannot have the majority of the Indian children actually getting early learning that is happening in very good preschools and play schools. To rectify or correct this imbalance, where the elite society is sending their children to the preschools and the play schools, and rest of them are going to the Anganwadi, where only health and nutrition are being addressed, we have focused on early childhood care and education. And we have gone on further to rectify some of the mistakes or rectify some of the imbalances. It would be wrong to use the word mistakes. Rectify some of the imbalances. We have a huge child dropout that takes place in the early stages in the primary classes between 1 to 3. It happens because, one, that child coming at the age of 6 has had no exposure to early learning, and therefore whatever happens in the class is unable to assimilate that because there has been not much cognitive development of the brain. And that is why we have said we will do in a mission mode a foundational literacy and numeracy mission, which will transform the way children would be able to learn to learn. It is learning how to learn and making these children understand the 3 R's of reading, writing, and mathematical abilities of numeracy or counting. Now, we have even set a target that by 2025, which is an extremely difficult target, to say that we would have achieved that every child in the school who is there between the classes 1 and 3 will be provided the foundational literacy and numeracy skills. And this would ensure that the child can go into effective learning as the child advances into subsequent stages. The other major change in the school education is the fact that we are shifting away from the current 10+2 to a new curricular and pedagogical restructuring of 5+3+3+4. And it is not, many would wonder why we are doing this. It is basically related to evidence and scientific backing that there is something that is called age appropriate learning, and that happens correlated to the ages of the child and the concomitant brain development that happens, and accordingly the learning abilities of the child keep changing according to different stages of growth. And based on that, we have said that we would have a foundational stage, which is the first 5 years between 3 to 8, the preparatory stage between 8 to 11, the middle stage between 11 to 14, and the secondary stage between 14 to 18. Now, please note, this is not a physical restructuring of schools. No existing schools will have to get restructured physically to meet this kind of a new paradigm. It is only a curricular and pedagogical restructuring. Approach to teaching learning would change, where the child would be learning from basics at the foundational stage and not going into abstract learning at that stage, then going into a preparatory stage where you build upon a certain foundation that you have acquired, And as you come into the middle stage, you go into more abstract and concrete part of the learning or a deeper learning. And when you come to the secondary stage, you make clear curricular choices of what you would like to take up as you would like to complete your secondary stage and move towards higher education. The approach to teaching learning, the pedagogic tools as teachers that they may have to employ to move away from rote learning to experiential learning, to developing a critical thinking, to developing a spirit of inquiry, to developing a ability to work in a team together, to actually experience and contextualize that learning. These are the things that will have to be done by the teacher. And as Dr. Nasreen rightly said, the driver of all this change is the teacher. And therefore, the teacher education curriculum will have to undergo a change. And just as the national curriculum framework for school education will be formulated in keeping with this new paradigm, similarly, the national curriculum framework for teacher education will also have to be changed to align itself to the new curricular objectives, the two forms of teaching learning, and obviously the new ways of assessing. If you are not going to test memory, which is what we are doing right now, and therefore forcing the children to go in for rote learning, and therefore putting a lot of pressure on them to go in for coaching, and the ultimate outcome of it is that the learning outcomes are not as desired at all, because children do not tend to actually understand learn something by understanding it. The child is not to relate to what's being said, and therefore he or she only keeps reading it out till the time it is memorized, regurgitates that onto the examination answer sheet, and then the child, you ask that child anything that the child has to understand about a subject, the child is unable to explain that. Now that has got to be changed, because if you actually put a practical part of it, if you actually give them aspects where they translate what they have learned into through practical experiences and through practical exams or through practical activities or through activities which engage them that learning, then there is an active learning that takes place. And obviously, if you want to test all this, the current examination system or the current assessment patterns will have to be changed. So the new 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 in the school education, and I want all faculty of higher education to understand this, because this is the fundamental change. And you cannot say that as faculty of higher education, it is irrelevant for me to understand what the NEP proposes as far as the school education is concerned. This is something that is related to teaching and pedagogy, and therefore all faculty in higher education, not just faculty of education, but all disciplines must understand that this change is bringing about flexibility in curricular choices. We are doing away with the silo-based learning even in the school education. We are incorporating vocational education from the middle school from class 6 onwards. And this changes of doing away with the curricular, co-curricular, extracurricular, academic, non-academic, vocational, entire boundaries are actually being melted, and you are allowing a child to choose the subjects as per his or her talent and combinations, which is where the flexibility is going to be a huge challenge. And that is why the idea of a school complex and the sharing of the teaching resources, the sharing of the learning resources have been put into play. And it is this same idea of flexibility in the choices that has been extended to higher education, which brings me to the major reform in higher education, that is of a holistic multidisciplinary education at the undergraduate level. And it is possibly only this particular area that I may be largely able to focus upon in the given time. And this flexibility that we are talking about in higher education. Currently, you have bachelor's degree being given as per the disciplines: arts, science, commerce, law, agriculture, pharmacy, engineering, technology, name it. You all know the variety of disciplines that you have. Now, the nature of knowledge, Professor Yashpal has said that way back, that knowledge is porous by nature. And therefore, there is a, let us say, a impact of other disciplines onto your own disciplines. And we have become so egoistic as faculty that we can talk to faculty from other departments in our same university. How do you then break that kind of barriers that you have? You have to move for understanding that knowledge is interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, and the idea of single discipline education is irrelevant in the 21st century. And if you have and equip your young students who are there in 2020 and who are going to graduate by about 2040 with only single discipline degrees, they will be unable to get jobs, and whatever jobs are there are not even known to us, thanks to artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, robotics, and all other changes that are taking place. What you therefore need to do is empower the students with multiple knowledges in different disciplines, allow them to develop the 21st century capacities and skills so that they are able to adapt to new knowledge, to new innovations, and change to the changing requirements of a knowledge economy and the kind of jobs that may be called for. That is all that we can do in the education system. And the idea of, therefore, holistic multidisciplinary says that a student can take a combination of courses which could range from maybe social sciences to pure sciences to applied sciences to performing arts to agriculture to music to sports, vocational education, allow a student to take it in any combination. Now, how is this going to be possible in the current scenario? Always understand policies cannot be limited by the current systems and structures. Policies are visionary documents. Policies are aspirational documents, and they cannot be constrained to think that it has to be only pragmatic by nature. If it says so, then it is not a policy. It is only something that is a two-page white paper on what current changes you want to bring up. Policies are big visionary documents. And that is the idea of holistic multidisciplinary education becoming a reality where a student may get admitted to Aligarh Muslim University, but Aligarh Muslim University may not have, let us assume, a sports academy there. Therefore, the student wants to learn a sport. The student can enroll for a sports course in any other university, try and get the credits for that particular course, and the student will have an individualized academic bank of credit by which credits acquired from different institutions, credits acquired by open and distance learning, credits acquired through MOOCs courses can all contribute to the total accumulation of credits of the student, and the institution from where he or she has taken admission, from that institution that student should have acquired the maximum number of credits, allowing a student to major in more than one discipline. So the flexibility comes in the choice of courses. The flexibility comes from more than one institution from where the student does a course. The flexibility comes from the fact that the student can do it even from ODL or from MOOC. Flexibility also comes from the duration of the program. We are saying it can be either 3 years or 4 years, and it is modular because every year the student will get a certificate, or 2 years a diploma, 3 years a bachelor's degree, 4 years a bachelor's in multidisciplinary with 2 majors. And if the student does a 4 years with a detailed project, research project or an in-depth research project, the student can even go directly to join a PhD program. But the student who's done a 3 years bachelor's will do a 2 years master's. A normal bachelor's in multidisciplinary will do a 1 year's master's. So you see the flexibility has come in the mode of learning, in the choice of courses, in the number of years, and finally in the combinations by which the student is taking all these courses. So this flexibility is something that is very major. We are thinking of HEI clusters. We are thinking of a national higher education qualifications framework, which will allow for equivalence of credits done from different universities. And finally, it is a customized or individualized academic bank of credit, which will be unique to every student depending upon the kind of courses or the credits that the student has acquired from multiple institutions or from institutions in an HEI cluster or through ODL plus MOOCs and so on. So this is a major shift that you are going to see in the higher education landscape. The other one is in the higher education institution itself. India takes pride in saying that we have one of the largest higher education systems in the world, with 1,000 universities, 30,000 standalone institutions, by different nomenclatures of central universities, state universities, private universities, affiliating universities, deemed universities, private standalone universities, and unitary universities, and so on. We would like to say that all higher education institutions ultimately have two major goals, three in reality. One is knowledge assimilation or transmission, which is what teaching is all about. One is knowledge creation, which is research. And the third is, of course, community service or engagement or societal engagement. Now, while societal engagement can happen parallelly with teaching and research should be understood as very interrelated activities. And at our undergraduate level, unfortunately, we keep complaining that India doesn't contribute much to research. How do you expect someone who's completed undergraduate education at the age of about 22 or so suddenly to have a research inspiration coming to the mind? Research has to be germinated at a much early age, and it has to start by promoting a scientific temper and the spirit of inquiry right from schooling onwards, and further provided a kind of when the person the education. In the education, restructuring of institutions is rather again a kind of an autonomous decision whether a university would like to be a teaching intensive university with some amount of research at undergraduate level, or rather a research intensive university with some amount of undergraduate teaching, and community engagement or societal engagement will remain in both these. But as HEIs are autonomous institutions, we will leave it to them to actually take a call on it. But all HEIs will by 2030 move to become multidisciplinary universities. No standalone institutions, whether it is for teacher education or management or pharmacy or law or agriculture, any of these, including technical education and medical education and pharmacy and so on, all of them will start having to offer multidisciplinary undergraduate education. And this can take place either by doing it in their own institution or by collaborating with other institutions in an MOU, which will allow for students to take that combination of courses. But we are seeing a transformation and a shift from single discipline institutions to multidisciplinary institutions. Now, on the affiliation system, the major change that we are talking about is we have 40,000 affiliated colleges, and at a certain time, affiliation served a certain purpose. But today, we have found that affiliation has become a bane rather than a boon. And that is why we would like to actually phase out the affiliation system in a period of about 15 years, by which time, through hand-holding, mentoring, we expect affiliated colleges to actually achieve certain benchmarks of standards and excellence to become autonomous degree granting colleges. Now, it would not mean that we would shut down colleges in rural areas, because when I come to the aspect of equity, let me mention that all our recommendations have a caveat. All of them have a rider which says that for equity considerations and for considerations of meeting the educational aspirations of underserved areas and of disadvantaged groups, the existing systems that are there, including colleges in the rural areas and so on, would continue to be there because it is serving a certain purpose of equity and access in those regions. When we said we have 5 pillars of access, equity, quality, affordability, and accountability, access, equity, and affordability are primary to us in keeping with the goals of sustainable development, because otherwise you will create an elitist education system and not a democratized education system. If you want a democratized education system, you should allow for every single person who is aspiring for education to have an opportunity to participate in the educational system. And it is in this concept of equity that we are talking about providing in chapter 6 and in chapter 14 the inclusive education for socially and economically disadvantaged groups, which includes the SCSTs, the OBCs, the minorities, women, transgenders, children of migrant labor, urban poor, people living in geographically inaccessible areas, including those with learning disabilities and physical disabilities. And for all these together, while we have many have asked us why we remain silent on reservation. Reservation is a the powers to even look at any changes in that unless it is brought about by a constitutional amendment. All that this policy has said is that over and above the constitutional mandate of reservation, many affirmative actions will be taken and many interventions and strategies will be deployed so as to ensure the equitable participation of children coming from these so-called disadvantaged groups so that they have equal access not only for school education but also for higher education by interventions of setting up gender inclusion fund, setting up special education zones, social inclusion funds, enhancing of scholarships, providing library facilities, and also in higher education for the first time saying that higher education need not be offered only in English medium, that it can be offered in regional languages. India is an agrarian country and 80% of its population depend upon agriculture. And let us hope that it continues to remain an agrarian economy because there will be a food crisis in this country if you move away from an agrarian economy to become. It has to be always a balance between agrarian economies and industrial economies. One cannot be at the cost of the other. And in agrarian economy, need to pursue higher education because the medium of instruction in higher education is English. And therefore, the deterrent of that medium of instruction has sought to be done away with. And we are saying that we can offer higher education even in regional languages, which means we would have to have teachers being prepared who can teach higher education in regional languages. And therefore, there is a huge opportunity in the teacher education and in the kind of programs that we can think of where faculty could be prepared for teaching in regional languages. We have also said that the public and the private institutions will be governed by the same yardstick. And that is a very critical change, which means that even private institutions will have to offer a lot of scholarships. Now, in the limited time that I have, let me focus upon students and what has this policy done to strengthen the students other than the academics that we are talking about of flexibility. We have said that they should have optimal learning environments, and which means that all sorts of learner support should be there for a student's holistic development. It could be not only the regular good quality teaching learning, but also the fact of having student support being provided through counseling, academic counseling, psychological counseling to remove them from the stress, to reduce the kind of examination pressure. And while we are talking about assessment reforms, we would like to remove the students from the concept or idea of a coaching culture where learning within a normal university or a school should be adequate to prepare the students for taking up different competitive examinations as well as for the jobs. So we want that a vibrant university life with debating clubs and poetry clubs and sports clubs and many other activities which allow for the holistic development of a student should be allowed so that there is a vibrant participation of the student in all these aspects. I am not touching upon teacher education, but on higher education faculty, it is important to note that we are talking about energized, motivated, and capable faculty in chapter 13 of the NEP 2020. And I'd urge each one of you to read that because we are talking about a robust recruitment system, trying to restore the dignity of teaching as a profession, but at the same time trying to say that career growth should allow them to take on leadership positions through continuous professional development, a point that has been emphasized that the governance of higher education institutions has a crisis because you don't have faculty taking on leadership positions. It should be faculty, ideally, moving on to take up leadership positions. But at the same time, we have recognized the autonomy of the faculty in teaching learning, in curriculum development, including in the framing of the institutional development plans of higher education institutions. Now, all these changes have got one rider, and that is of teacher accountability. Unlike in school education, where teachers are held responsible for the learning outcomes of their students. In higher education, the correlationship between the kind of learning and education that they have to the kind of jobs that they take is just not there. And we thought that this has to be brought about. And that is why we want teachers to actually start looking at what does that course entail in terms of the job roles that by doing that course that a student would do, and that has to also come about with a certain kind of accountability which impacts the career growth and progression. So while some faculty who do well will be incentivized by fast track promotions, the others would also have to ensure that they perform through what we call an extended probation period of a tenure track system. So as Nazreen had rightly said, autonomy with accountability. You can give autonomy, but you also have to put a measure of accountability. On the regulatory and on internationalization, we have encouraged faculty, student, and institutional mobility with the idea that we need to understand we are living in a globalized society, and in a globalized society, you must be open to international institutions also coming here. But let me mention at this stage that all these recommendations are subject to rules, regulations, and appropriate legislations being brought about. Policies become effective only when it is supported by a proper implementation strategy. The implementation of this policy will be taking place in phases. It is also related to the fact that you will have certain legislations to come, such as for for the Education Commission of India. These to be reviewed and revised to meet the new requirements. These are all legislative changes. But coming, I think, on the last point on technology, because of COVID, we wrote chapter 24. We recognize that technology has a huge role to play in improving the quality of teaching learning, but it has to be appropriate technologies and not using technology without understanding the purpose of that particular academic program. And COVID has accelerated the use of technology in many ways. And now we need to understand to what extent the digital divide is affecting the learning of our students. How do we improve the digital infrastructure? How do we bring about better faculty preparedness, student preparedness, and institutional preparedness to handle the appropriate use of technology during COVID time so that a generation of students do not get affected in their learning continuity? And finally, on the regulatory system, you're all aware that we are proposing a new architecture of the Higher Education Commission of India with the 4 independent verticals for regulation, accreditation, grants, and for academic standard setting. All these reforms are expected to have a light but tight regulatory system, and the idea is to prevent over concentration of 4 functions in one body and therefore prevent mutually conflicting powers being given in one body. And it is not that UGC and AICT have not served their purpose, but they cannot be performing all these 4 roles together, which is again the principles of any administration. And therefore, regulation, accreditation, funding, and standard setting are being separated by independent bodies to be headed by an umbrella architecture of HECI, which will coordinate and ensure that if there are issues of conflict between these 4 independent verticals, that they would be taken care of by the Higher Education Commission of India. The finances, yes, we have said about earmarking 6% GDP. This has been a long pending goal. We hope that along with not only the investment from the government of India and by the states, that innovative ways of corporate funding, private philanthropy, alumni funding, endowment funds, new ways in which we can pool in resources. But it is, of course, a fact that in the current crisis, this is all sounding very, very difficult to achieve. For implementation, the existing body of the Central Advisory Board on Education, which is a federal body, because it is education as a concurrent list, will be strengthened to be there as a standing body and will ensure that we have the implementation of NEP taking place in a phased manner to achieve the quantitative targets of reaching 50% GER by 2035 and to bring about a total transformation which will equip our students, empower our teachers, and make our educational institutions better equipped to meet with the challenges of the 21st century. Let us, on this day of the National Education Day, rededicate ourselves to the vision of a great visionary and a great leader, Maulana ji, and hope that we all contribute our might in implementing the NEP 2020. Let us understand nobody else implements it. Each one of us have got to do our bit to implement the NEP 2020. That is how you live. You lead by your own performance, and that is the only way a policy can be translated to become a reality in letter and spirit. Thank you once again. And maybe in the limited time, because I have another webinar in another about 15 minutes. So if there are a couple of questions, I'd be open to take that, but I'll wind up surely by 3:50. Thank you very much for the opportunity and all my good wishes to AMU Murshidabad for taking forward your dreams and achieving a strategic plan of action for implementing the NEP 2020. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh, we are extremely thankful to you for expressing the NP 2020 explicitly. And I'm mesmerized by the energy of you, ma'am. You are talking it as very explicitly on NPE, and you have explained all the small and big points of NPE. And our this is a big opportunity for all the participants. If anyone want to ask any question, you can ask, but you have to be very quick. You have to be summarize your question very soon. Anybody from the participants? No one is there, ma'am. Thank you. Now at the end, I would like to invite Mr. Tasneem Ahmed, Course Coordinator and Assistant Professor, Department of Education, to kindly propose formal vote of thanks. Tasneem Ahmed, sir.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Ji. It is a great moment for our department and our center that we are celebrating the National Education Day on the memory of our great leader and educationist Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad. And I am highly grateful to our host and organizing committee that take pain to organize this program, especially Shakila Shamshu ma'am. What is a great pleasure for me, especially for our department, that we only heard you, ma'am. First time we face to face heard your ideas and thoughts on the education. We listen your name in terms of the new education policy. It is a very great time for us. We are our department is also very grateful and thankful to our teacher and guide Naseem ma'am. She spare a very precious time for us, and department also very grateful to our director sahab who guide and encourage us to organize this great program, and especially our organizing team, our colleagues, all colleagues, especially Samad हैं और अयाज साहब and Umair साहब and Rashid साहब and Fahmuddin साहब. And ma'am, this is a very special time for all of us, especially the participant, those participate in this program, or those are, or especially our students, BEd students who passed from the department, they spend their precious time. Ma'am, your ideas and thinking about the new education policy, or especially on this aspect of the implementation. It will be guide for us when we teach in our classroom about this new education policy. So that thank you for all participants and our organizing members and the key speakers and Nasreen ma'am who guide us and direct us to take these events. Thank you.
Thank you, Tasneem sir, for this beautiful vote of thanks. And with this, at last, thank you for your participation and time given to us. The program is formally ended. You can leave now.